Welcome to Integrate or Die. My name is Steve Hunt.
And I'm Jordan Katz.
So today we talked to Mary Poppen, who is a woman who has focused on experience, customer experience, employee experience, as well as customer service. And she's really been on multiple sides of it. She's been on the side of software as a service renewals, understanding customer experiences driving on renewals. She's been on the side of using technology and developing technology to understand employee experience and how it affects customer experience, and gets into the really discussion of the not just the technology, but the, for want of a better term, politics and the dynamics
Mhm.
of trying to improve customer experience and employee experience to drive business results. So, Jordan, what were some of the things that you took from our conversation with Mary?
Well, I found it very interesting, not just a discussion about how to raise insights and understand and learn things about what's going on in the organization, but the imperative that we take that and elect someone to actually do something about it. On the one hand, Mary told some stories about organizations that learned interesting different things, and then grassroots efforts took over, and some parts of the organization yielded great results. Whereas, you know, organizations that actively seek those insights and then have a very intentional approach to taking action on those, you're much more likely to see those results cascade throughout the organization in a majorly impactful way. And then the other thing is, like, that's not all there is to it. If you start by understanding which outcomes you want to encourage and which outcomes you want to influence, and then build everything on the back of that. So, an outcome based approach and a focus on impact that you're going to drive, it makes everything easier.
Yeah.
And certainly you're able to say, I took this action. I remember maybe when, previously we weren't able to take this action because we had inferior technology or support or resources, but I took this action. I said it was going to impact X, Y, and Z, and it did impact X, Y, and Z. That's definitely the way to go, and definitely a way to make your customers feel positive and retained over the long term.
Yeah, kind of looking at the ultimate, sort of the end goal. I think
Yep.
that the couple of things she took away from me when she talked about within organizations trying to focus more on customer experience and employee experience is that the challenge you said is the cross-functional nature of it. That
Mhm.
in an
Mhm.
organization, what like a leader might be looking at is sort of like, financial profitability. They make these decisions that make sense from one perspective, but they don't make sense from the perspective of the people on the front line supporting customers. And her really kind of focus on, as much as possible, you should push down decision making to people on the front lines. The farther down you can, giving them technology, one, so they understand what's going on, awareness, but giving them autonomy and resources, and sort of moving that away, because top down decisions usually don't understand, people don't understand the reality people have on the
Right.
front lines, and
Right.
trying to do that as much as possible. And related to that, she's really advocate that we need what she called a total experience officer, which she kind of said, look, experience being people's emotion, the reactions that they're having, that cuts across every aspect of an organization. And sort of like, you could say we have a chief financial officer because money flows through every part of the company. She's like, experience flows through every part of the company. We need to look at it. It's a real art to looking at it and having a whole. She sort of said that idea that, imagine if you had a function that every decision the company made, there was a function in there, not just saying, are we going to be profitable, but also, are we going to be creating the experiences that are going to drive the employee outcomes and to drive the customer outcomes to make the company successful. Found that really, really fascinating. So with that,
Very fascinating.
let's go listen to Mary. Mary, so great to have you on Integrate or Die. We go back a long ways, and we always start the show by telling you why we thought you'd be a great guest. And the reason is that you have a really interesting career. You've kind of, one, you've done a lot of work in customer renewals and getting people to renew technology, HR technology. So you're familiar with like what good implementation and bad implementations and usage goes. But then you've also morphed your career to using the technology itself that's used to support customer renewals and employee experience and all the things that drive renewal of technology. So you've been on both sides. And so that's kind of how we wanted to bring you in, because that perspective. But how would you describe your expertise when it comes to HR technology? What are you like a super smart about?
Well, thanks so much for having me on your show. And it's always great to talk to you, Steve. Yes, we go way, way back. I have been, gosh, dare I say, it's been over 2 decades in HR tech. I know, I can't believe I'm saying that. Mostly B2B SaaS And so there was really this evolution from on-prem, right, to SaaS. And I think I got this from you actually, Steve, which is going from building houses to renting apartments, which has resonated for years and years with people. But it's so true because it shifted the way that companies had to put customers at the center of the business to succeed, right, and to survive. And along with that, over time, we've seen that HR technology can help put employees at the center of the company as well. And so now you've got your employees and your customers at the center of your business, and now amazing results happen for the business. So I've been able to see that firsthand, and I'm super passionate about that linkage between EX and CX.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's funny. We lived through that move to software as a service. I think a lot of people entering the HR technology field don't realize there was this dark time of on-prem, and some people are still living in that dark time. But
Dark,
it was
scary
where,
closets that were
yeah,
temperature controlled.
where
Exactly.
really people, couldn't. One, it took forever to implement things, but once you implemented them, you couldn't get off them. It wasn't renewals. Where now we're more like the world of apps, where it's like, hey, if I like this app, I'll turn it on. If I don't like it, I'll just get rid of it. And I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but it's had this really big impact on customers' power over HR technology and saying, no, I don't like it. I'm not going to use it. That's massive.
It's exactly right. And they don't have to rely just on their IT department or their, CFO even approving budget for solutions because they've been able to select them themselves and be able to afford it within their budget and to deploy it on their own. And that has really changed the
Yeah.
game.
So one of the things that's interesting is that you and I met first when you managed customer renewals and you managed the group and we worked together in that. But then you went on and you've gone into more of the experience technology itself, the thing that impacts these renewals. So what is it what kind of technology do you work the most with?
So great question. And by the way, did you ever tell people that you were part of the CIA,
That's
Customer
true.
Insights and Adoption?
Oh my
That's
goodness.
right. Yeah.
Right?
Stop the presses. We need to go only talk about that from now on.
Well, we can only talk about it because 10 years has passed, and so now we can talk
Oh,
about it.
fairness. Statute of limitations on what was it? Customer intelligence, what?
What was it? Customer insights
Oh,
and
Customer Insights and Adoption.
yeah,
Oh, there you
CIA.
go.
Yeah.
CIA. I totally forgot.
Cloaked in darkness, hiding in the shadows.
So,
Go on, sorry.
no, this is great. There's been such an evolution in HR tech from compliance, kind of changing compliance focused processes to really moving toward innovation and reimagining how the employees' sentiment, how their productivity, how their development can be supported, right, and made visible so that managers actually have what they need to help their teams be successful and to make decisions, right? Instead of doing performance reviews once a year or doing an engagement survey that's 100 questions long and seeing results 6 months later after the issues are no longer an issue. So most of the HR technology that I've been a part of has been that kind of full picture of helping employees develop and setting goals and evaluating their performance, but then layering on the sentiment, which has been really in the last, 10 years. We've had that capability. And then this could be a huge topic, you guys, so I'll rein it in, which is AI. Layering in AI and having the ability to run on the back end all of those relationships across data between operational employee and customer data to sentiment data, employee satisfaction, customer sat. The linkages that you can make and identify with AI is incredible. And I think we're just scratching the surface there. But that's the kind of tech over time, that I've seen evolve.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I talk about this, and I often talk about like technology. We have technology that sort of operates on employees, like whether it's goal setting, comp, and it's we take an action to affect employees. But what happens when you implement, let's say, a new compensation process? The first thing is employees react to it. And now we have technology to understand how they're reacting to it. How do they feel about it? How do they like it? And then based on how they react to it, that's going to change their behavior which is going to impact customers. And how does that impact customers? And now we're tying all of this technology together with historically companies would implement like, we're going to roll a new comp process. Is it work? I don't know. Because they didn't have data on employee attitudes, they didn't have data on employee behavior. So now pulling all of those different things together, and you've kind of cut across all those different areas. I mean, it's interesting that as a person that is focused on from implementing the sort of classic talent management technology through employee experience technology through customer experience technology, you've kind of seen that linkage. What when you look at this is the first question on successes, when you look at this technology making this linkage, what are you like, what is the stuff you're like, how come everyone isn't doing this when there's technology out there right now that there's, we're going to talk about the new stuff like the AI, but what about like stuff that you're like, hey guys, this has been around forever, I can't believe companies don't do it?
It's there's so what I will say is there's two things I think that are the culprit. One is, and these are both really hard for companies, it's cross-functional alignment, prioritization, and the fact that customer experience, employee experience, product experience, I mean, you name it, experience is everyone's responsibility because that's how your company is going to be successful. So every single role in the company has a role in what the outcome is, for what the company is trying to do, if that makes sense. And so the cross-functional alignment is the first piece. The second piece is actually taking action on your data, on your insights. So we've done a really good job of collecting data. We've done a really good job of building dashboards and showing data, especially within functions. We have not been good at sharing that data across functions, and we have not been good at holding people accountable for actually taking action on that data and the insights.
What do you think the root cause of that is? Why do people, because you're right, we've for years, maybe decades, we've been showing information, and there's whole industries whose sole purpose is to surface information for the people who are ostensibly supposed to be decision makers and action takers. Is it just that human beings are bad at taking action? Is it inertia? Object at rest stays at rest? Like, why are we still talking about this now? And what do you think? Have you seen it happen where they do take action? And what was the key driver?
So I've seen it both ways, where it's the executive team gets in a room and they go, here's our pillars of success, and these are our goals. And the employee engagement score and the customer satisfaction score is a number that's tracked, and everybody gets a bonus if it increases, right, by 2 or 3% or whatever. So you measure that next year. So people don't think about it, they don't worry about it, and they don't weave it into the day-to-day operations, right? So the executive team's in a room and they say, this is what we're going to focus on. You share the employee sentiment results, you share, customer feedback, but there isn't a role or a function that is responsible to actually take that information and roll it back into company, results and priorities across the board. So what happens is every functional leader is given information and insights. They have to decide, do I change my course of my goals I have now based on this feedback, or do I just stick with what the CEO asked me to do? And all too often, the CEO is far removed from pulling everyone together around, right, employee feedback and customer feedback. So things don't change. Then next year they measure the results and they go, oh, we didn't move the needle on employee satisfaction. We didn't move the needle on customer sat. Why? And
I know what to do. You run an RFP and you switch tech and advisory providers. Isn't that what we do? No? And then we continue to not take action?
Yeah, or you restructure, or you do something that has not anything related
Everybody's job changes.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's interesting because it is that customer. It's really about thinking about things through the customer perspective, the employee's perspective all the time, and then companies don't. They make the decisions from, as you say, the CEO perspective, which is not the employee perspective. And so when you look at technologies, because it's so fascinating. When you look at technologies, are there technologies you've seen that have helped leaders realize that, hey, you're balancing what your board and stakeholders are saying, and usually that's around profit and growth, and you're balancing what your employees are saying, which is about work-life balance and career development, and you're balancing what your customers are saying, which is about better service, lower price. Um, that and you like leaders are in the middle, right? But naturally, probably the biggest voice is who they report to is going to have the biggest impact. But then that leads to this problem that you're having. How are you seeing technology improving that? Is that something, or is that something that technology can't solve?
So there are technologies that are now being designed for multiple functions to leverage the right information and insights. For example, your product teams, your customer success teams, marketing and sales can all leverage like a customer intelligence platform, right? Something that will surface insights, it'll pull data from, you know, Salesforce, from your customer success systems, from support, from everything, right? Centralized. We've gotten good at being able to do that, made it easier. But it's still only, it only surfaces the insights. Those functions still have to decide internally how they're going to use that information and collaborate to take action. So product will get their insights and go off. Customer success will take their, right? And there isn't, my opinion, if there was a total experience team in the company that could sit and report to the CEO, that function would help create all of the user journeys, right? Experience journeys, measures of success, handoffs, and most importantly, like the content, because there's so much that can be shared process-wise, product content, all of that across these teams, and that they can work with each function to leverage those experiences. So I see that as a potential solution down the road. So if there's a technology that could be created to support that, I think that's the next billion-dollar tech.
That's really fascinating, the total experience. Because as you're talking, I'm thinking, Mary, when you and I worked together, remember back in the CIA, we did an analysis that
You're not allowed to talk about it, Steve.
Right.
So the lifeblood of software as a service is renewals, right? Renewal of licenses. And we did a study where we looked at renewals, and we found, and this should be just blatantly obvious, that you had much higher renewals when you had stable relationships between the customer support or customer support executive and the customer. Like if they knew each other for more than a year or 2 years, in some cases, those are the ones where you got renewals. There's more forgiving because people don't work with companies; they ultimately work with people, right? and
Right.
and so, but then you see restructurings all the time. You see, like in a leadership, every time they bring in some consulting leadership company, the only thing they can do seems like is restructure. And so you are destroying these relationships all the time.
Mhm.
And the employees don't like it either, because relationships are what we thrive on at work, is relationships. So I think that's so fascinating. How are you seeing have you seen companies like really be successful in saying, look, what makes sense from a financial restructuring standpoint doesn't necessarily make sense from a customer relationship, employee experience structure, and getting that balance? Where have you seen that happen, or is it still just something I'm hoping for?
You know what? I have a really great example from the days that, we did work together.
Hmm.
It still, unfortunately, requires a lot of manual intervention. But what we were able to do is say, what is driving renewals, the most from the actions, behaviors, and roles that we have in our organization, and what is driving upsell the most. And so what we did is we took all the data and compared customers that had a customer success manager, customer engagement executive, to those that didn't. Exactly what you were just saying, Steve. We also looked at customers who had attended a VIP event, which was not for just important customers, because they're all important, but it was value and innovation in practice. And these were educational events that we put on globally. And we actually found that customers who attended at least one VIP event were 13 times more likely to renew their agreement. And it was like, if I remember correctly, like 18% more likely to upsell just from attending one VIP event. And that if they had a customer success manager versus not, they were about 85% more likely to renew than, if they didn't. Those are the kinds of insights that you bring to your CEO or CFO and you say, if we double down and invest here, look at the return. Because the data doesn't lie as long as people trust the data and you can show the data is accurate. That's another piece.
Right.
Talk about how you ran the linkage analytics, but it's the story. It's that headline that relates to productivity, growth, scalability, right? And that's where you get people's attention. So if you can do that and link customer experience and employee experience to the business outcomes, you'll get the attention and the resources, right? And the focus that you need. That's what I've seen be successful. And
So it is doable, but I think it's like taking this data and really having to articulate in a way that they look at it from a different perspective. So much as it seems like what I'm hearing you say, so much as is about getting executives to look at things from a different perspective and different functions, and historically there just hasn't been a lot of good data around employee and customer experience. So and there's a lot of good data around cost.
yeah, well, I'll say this, that if if you go to the CEO and you say happy employees, are good for the company, he or she is going to say, yeah, yeah, I
Right.
agree with that.
Make them
Perfect.
happy.
Let's make everyone happy. And so that's the goal. We need to be able to say, these are the things that we're doing that are helping employees be happy at work. And these are the things that are taking away from that satisfaction and causing employees to leave. And when you have that data and you can tell a powerful story about how much revenue is retained, profitability, productivity, when you can start talking in those terms, then you're taken seriously and you can start to ask for specific things. Otherwise it's just anecdotal. Of course it makes sense, but if you can't link it to business outcomes, then it's a challenge.
Mhm.
And this is like my favorite topic of all time, right? Because I say it every time. Take us from where we are right now, which is we need to make employees happy and outcomes will happen. Will you share an example of some impact that you've seen where a company has studied what's going on in the recurring patterns of thoughts and feelings and behaviors in the minds of the employees and enhance that to some sort of great outcome with customers or profitability or revenue or whatever?
Yeah, I can share. There's I won't say the name of the company,
No.
but
Yeah,
it's
good.
there was a specific division in this company. So they had a global employee engagement program, and then there was a division in this company which was their support organization. They actually decided to innovate within the bounds that they could make their own decisions, and
Right.
they started to implement different reward systems and different cadence to getting employee feedback. So they were able to determine quickly what was working and what would turn around, I guess, the negative customer sentiment in this particular part of the organization. These innovations actually created, it was something like 18 to 20% greater retention, customer retention,
Mm.
just from the time that they started to implement these new programs
Yep.
to write the measurement. And those enhancements then started to be adopted across the company. So they started to see even greater returns. That's the grassroots kind of things sometimes
Yeah.
have to be done by the functional leaders that have an opportunity to do that and can have the vision. But it's hard, right? If you can get
Yeah.
that buy-in top down and be able to get a CEO to see the employee experience is what matters to the success of your company,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a
But
better
this
chance to
this
roll it out more
this
quickly.
actually comes back to your prior comment, your sort of a wish list comment, which is, and while you were talking, I was thinking about the role of total comp. Like there are people whose job it is to focus on total comp. And that came from there were payroll people and there were benefits people and there were incentives people and variable comp people, right? And they needed a layer on top to come together and say, here's how we're going to leverage all of these potential change drivers to drive, create more value for the organization. So basically, we need, back to your point, like a total experience role. Otherwise, the support function that you just described, right, happens in a bubble.
Yeah.
You can't forecast an 18% or 18 times change in retention. It happens. It's like a great surprise. But if the total experience role exists or technology or layer or whatever, then it homes in on that change and spreads it out in not a grassroots manner, which means it's much faster and more governed and more
Yeah,
effective, which could ultimately have greater impact.
absolutely.
Well,
Go ahead, Steve.
well, no, I was just thinking as you're kind of building on that, though, as you're talking about in that example, if you think about what employees want, okay, so assume that employees want to do a good job, which I think is 99% do. What they need to do a good job is they need awareness of what is going to impact customer experience. They need autonomy so they can take action, and then they need the resources they need to do that. But a lot of companies push things down. They make employees do stuff that we've all heard employee goes, this doesn't make any sense, this is going to frustrate our customers. And I think they do that because, going back to you said cross functionally, at a high level they're focusing on usually cost and profit or some idea, but they're not focused on giving employees autonomy,
Yeah.
which you don't want to give just employees total autonomy either, within some sort of like boundaries. And I think that's really interesting that if you had an experience level person that goes, my job is to make sure that employees that affect our customers directly have the maximum amount of autonomy and awareness and resources possible, and we're not dictating things on them that don't make any sense from their perspective, which I think happens all the time. Um, what kind of coming back to tech, and it's funny because this makes sense on just companies in general, but it also happens in software as a services companies too. I think a lot of customer support people are like, yeah, they're not renewing because you're not letting me do what I need to do for them to renew.
Right.
What would you, if there was a technology going back on current innovations that you're like, every company should be using, here's a technology that you're familiar with, that's out there, don't care about who provides it, but just a functionality that you're like, if you're a company that depends on customer satisfaction and renewal, every one of them should be using this technology and this is how they should use it, what would you say it is?
So what I will say is it doesn't, what I want to see doesn't fully exist yet,
Okay.
Right.
which is AI. So there's a couple types of AI. Everybody knows the generative AI, right? Large language models, like everybody's starting to talk about LLM and everybody knows what it is, right? So like AI now has sort of this definition, but I'm going to go back to what I think is the most impactful part of AI, which has been used for many, many years, but not really understood that it was even being used by people, which is the ability to look across millions of data sets and start to predict what's going to happen when you see this pattern of behavior or actions or product usage, or in being able to look at that data with your business context layered on top and say, this makes sense, right? And be able to tell that story to your executive team. So I will say, like, the data scientists are some of my favorite people, but even they don't know what questions to ask sometimes, right?
Right.
Business leaders don't. If you don't know the questions to ask, you don't know the possibility of the relationships or insights you could get, right? There's relationships and things you wouldn't even think of.
Right.
It could be your employee onboarding time frame to when your customer is actually upsell. You wouldn't think those things are related, but they might be, right? So taking a look at the data and across experiences, again, if you think of total experience, and see where those insights are, where are those relationships, because then you can start to target doubling down on stuff that works, getting ahead of proactively things that are going on with your customer. You see usage drop by 30% in a 3-week time frame. That's a huge indication something needs to be done, because we know if you don't act in 2 weeks, it's going to go down further and customers leave. Like 80%
Sure.
opportunity to churn.
You know,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I do. And I think for that to happen, it goes back. We were talking in a previous episode of Ben Grange. I don't know if you know him, is
Yeah.
Qualtrics employee experience. And he
Yeah.
was talking about that you need to use this data though for understanding and communication and not evaluation. And I think that's where your point about having an experience level up at this C-suite that looks at it from first and foremost, my objective is to make sure that our employees and our customers are having good experiences, which is not the same as maximizing profitability.
Right.
That there's, or at least not the short term, because as you're talking about that, I think a lot of things with the data is I've seen companies go, we need more data so we can do all these things. And then they put in this like process that the poor customer service rep is like, all I'll be doing is entering data into this system to go to somebody that I don't trust how they're going to use it.
Right.
So, I know you've lived through that. How would you recommend companies do what you're trying to do without creating this painful administrative death by process?
Well, what I've seen is processes and technology often get deployed either just in time or kind of incrementally based on the business having budget, right? And the timing of when you implement it might be, as an example, customer health tracking. When you only have 50 customers, you can put it in a spreadsheet. When you have 100, it starts to get a little bit more tricky. Yes, can you hijack a sales CRM system and start to create fields or whatever to do what you need to do? Sure. But over time, you've created now something you're going to have to backtrack and fix, right? Because your foundation is being built piecemeal. And so you're sort of duct taping things together. When you get to the point that you realize we need to define a process, or we need, a technology to address this, oftentimes it's after the point at which it would have been helpful, if that makes sense. So now you have to back up and sort of redo your foundation. I think the best thing companies can do, and it probably sounds cliche because it's used a lot, but it's crafting the customer journey, crafting the employee journey, all of the experience journeys, and defining what does good look like, what is ideal, and then saying where are we, and then determining where are the gaps, right? What you have to fix, along with measures of success. I'm going to throw that out there because the KPIs and measures are really, really important to knowing if you're doing it well. But that's the best starting point. Define the journey, then you can define the processes, the handoffs, the measures, the systems. And if you do that part early, a lot of times you can get ahead of having to kind of rip off Band-Aids and backtrack.
I like that with the defining the journey. It's sort of, it's funny because we've all lived through this, at least in our career, I think all of us in points. But how do you make sure that that journey that they're defining, what advice would you give as a company's doing that to make sure that journey is realistic? Because I've seen a lot of journeys that are like, yeah, that's good in theory, but that's not how it works in reality. Um, is there an approach to doing that before? Because I like you do this before you implement the technology, define the journey that you're trying to create. Is there something advice that you would give to say when you're doing this journey mapping, here's what you should do, or maybe here's what you shouldn't do?
Yeah, I think that the don't do right away is don't be fenced in just by what you're doing today or the resources you have available. You need to think outside the box. You need to look to the future to see what's possible. To your point, Steve, defining something that's realistic is look at what you're trying to accomplish. What outcomes for your customers are you trying to achieve? And then you can align your journey map to those outcomes. Because the worst thing you could do is just create an experience that's like this awesome, innovative experience, but at the end of the day, doesn't get your customer the outcomes they need. Because even though they had a great journey with you and they love you, they're not getting business results. And so then they're going to leave, right?
Mhm.
So it's starting with those outcomes and sort of the ultimate goal of what you're trying to deliver, and then building your journey around that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think part of that to an outcome is realizing that customer satisfaction, a lot of it is setting expectations appropriately. I think certainly as companies, sometimes you
Sure.
got to recalibrate expectations. So as it goes on.
That goes back to empowering your employees to be able
True.
to do what's right for the customer. You know, the
Yeah.
one other thing I'll say along these lines is personalization is, a hot topic, and in marketing has been looking at that for a really long time, and they've made some headway. But personalizing the employee experience and personalizing the customer experience, it is possible, and it's possible to do at scale. But the first thing you have to do is decide, what does kind of the baseline journey or experience look like, and then you have to know your customers, know your employees, and that's how you modify, right, the how of the journey for, the right stakeholder.
Yeah, to have more information on that. Well, it's like we've sort of like gone, it's really fascinating because it's like going into technology, and this cuts across so many different aspects of both technology to measure employee experience, but also the fact that when you're in a software service company, you have to understand this. And it's like this hits on so many different areas. Try to ground it into like back to something like pragmatic, because you've been on so many different sides of this fence. Like I want to
Yeah.
say it's what are there things when people are trying to improve customer experience with technology, is there stuff that you see common mistakes again and again, either like technology that doesn't do what it should do, or technology not being used the right way? When you kind of go in, is there anything you're like, look, if you're working with customer experience technology and employee experience technology, this don't do this?
Mm, yeah. Over engineering the tech, layering on all the bells and whistles right away, and over complicating your processes. Your team needs just a straightforward way to, document what's going on with the customer, document next steps, and then track the key information that you need for visibility. So be clear about what you really need to know about your customers, and then focus your systems, on that visibility. Don't just implement automation for workflows just because it's cool. You have to actually know what the workflow is trying to achieve, and how it contributes, I guess, to how the employee is supposed to interact with the customer. So over engineering, I think, is a big one because it's appealing. It's like the shiny object, right? That's one. An example I can share that kind of crosses between what employees need to know and kind of customer outcomes. I worked with a customer who shall remain nameless, who had
Good.
uh, spent a lot of time building out training for their end users. And their end users were responsible for, we'll just say, financial planning. Now, they built 4 levels of certification, which was awesome, right? They spent a lot of time on this. And the premise was that anyone who was sort of a level 4 would be the best user, right? And you'd be able to retain those customers. And so all of the enterprise customers were focused on getting to level 4. So the customer success managers, that was their main target, was to get customers to achieve certification at level 4 for their enterprise customers. When we did an analysis and used our AI and customer intelligence data, what we found is that level 1 training was the only thing that was correlated and mattered to
Oh,
retention and um, sound kind of usability of the software. And what was fascinating is that 60% of their customer base was small to mid-market size customers. And then, of course, what they call long tail. And they had not completed level 1 certification, a huge majority of them. So they were churning tons of customers on the small end. So they were able to take that data, shift focus, keep this level 4 certification because it's helpful, but get everybody through level 1. And their retention numbers increased just in the first couple months after putting this focus in. they empower the employees, right, to be able to go out and proactively help customers get into and get through level 1 certification across all of their customers. So that's the kind of insight, right, where you believe something to be true, because more training, of course, more training means better success.
Yeah.
Well, not really, right? So when you look at the data, it tells a different story. And now you can shift direction and have better business results, arm your team, everyone's happy.
Yeah.
I've had a long history of working with clients who do what I like to call unforced errors, right? And an unforced error, one example of an unforced error is launching something like you just described and then never taking the time to look at the efficacy of their efforts or the impact of their actions. What techniques have you seen in your career that have been effective or ineffective around getting clients to go that next step? And instead of doing half measures, which is launching the initiative, going, the full way to saying, what did we do and what is it impacting? And then how do we recalibrate if it's not doing what we
Um,
want?
Yeah. So a lot of times the buyer is not the person who is doing the implementation and even attending, right, kind of
Right.
outcome meetings, unfortunately. So what I've seen fail is that what gets implemented to what they were expecting, or even
Mhm.
measuring the success criteria wasn't even part of the conversation, unfortunately. And so there was nothing to point back to say, yes, we've been successful or not. So the
Right.
only success they had was that the software was deployed and people had licenses and were logging in, right? I
Oy.
know it's really your eyes. You're
Yeah.
like, oh. But the most successful that I've seen is when the salesperson establishes the why, the customer's buying, they have success criteria. It gets handed off to the customer success manager and the professional services teams, and they then use that to define the processes, configure the solution, and the CSM and the account manager, who's responsible for renewals, goes back in quarter over quarter, and they have a value review. And that value review brings in the success criteria and actually says, here's where we were, here's where we are now, here's where we need to go. That has been the most impactful, not only in terms of engagement with the customer, but in retention as well.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's
Thank you.
funny because it sounds so obvious, that like going back to
Right.
customer expectations. But what happens in this system is often, one person will buy the solution, that person may leave the company, somebody else goes in, and then 2 years later, you've got a customer who doesn't even know why the company has this, why even bought this to begin with. Where if
Right.
you define that this is why you bought it, even if the people change, the criteria for success doesn't change unless we have a conversation about it, which is fine. But companies do such a lousy job of keeping track of that stuff over time. It's that handoff between sales, customer support, um, which
You know what?
yeah.
What else is really funny is that customers forget where they came from. So
Mhm.
if you don't remind them, like how you were using paper just 6 months ago
Oh.
for performance reviews, and now look, it's all online. Like a lot of times, you kind of need to go back and say, here's the picture of where you were, and look how far you've come, right? So it is that kind of constant reminder of how the partnership and the value is working.
Yeah, I think that's really true. People go from like innovation to expectation very, very quickly. And part of that, I think, when you get a renewal, is like you are getting value, but you forgot you're getting the value because you're getting the value.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So so just the last sort of question I have is on this is sort of fascinating is on the I was on career guidance in this whole area. This is like, when you started out, there was no real customer renewal experience. It was not a field, it was not a technology market. It didn't really exist the way that it exists now. And you've kind of when you see this as a career area, the whole world of like customer experience technology, renewal technologies, all of the software as a service, what do you think this is like a good career option for somebody? And if so, somebody would say, what advice would you give to people to say, hey, if you wanted to work in my world, this is the kind of stuff you should focus on? Or should they
Yeah.
just run away, say no?
Don't run away. There's so much to be done. We're heading toward total experience, right? We uncovered it
Right,
on this
right.
podcast, so
It's a
we know
new
what's going
role.
to happen,
Yeah.
right? No, I would say when I think about one of the things that has been the most help in my career and what I would recommend to others in terms of just whether it's a skill you have or something you can develop is curiosity. I think that's the number one thing is, once you get to where you're trying to go, ask what's next, right? And don't just use data at your fingertips and say, okay, this is all of the data I have or all the insights I have. Ask what else there could be, right? And so start thinking across um, functional bounds in the organization and start thinking about how you could work better together. These are the kinds of things that will continue to drive your career, but also help the organization move forward.
Yeah, it's coming back to that cross-functional. I think
Yeah,
that the really big takeaway from a lot of insights from the conversation, but that one, your observation of experience is really a cross-functional thing. Everyone's responsible for it, but that means nobody's accountable for it. And it falls through the wayside from people making decisions based on one perspective, not thinking of the consequences this would have on either employee or customer experience, and that need to elevate that up. But if you're going to be somebody who's like an experienced professional, that curiosity of other people's perspective is so critical.
absolutely. There's
Very
one
good
other
point.
thing that I'll say
Mhm,
that I think I found really helpful, because you can have ideas and try to force them on your colleagues,
mhm,
and other functions, and say, look at if you just do this, you'll get this result. If you approach it with help me help you kind of
mhm,
mentality and say, what can my team be doing differently or better to fix, right, our handoff from the sales cycle? What can my team, when you're approaching it, it removes kind of the defensiveness and you're not directing what needs to happen, but you're approaching it in more of a help capacity. 99% of the time, what happens is they bring people and processes to the table to make improvements because they have that buy-in and see what the changes could be. And so that's the other thing, curiosity, and just go into conversations cross-functionally with help me help you.
sort of a servant
I
mindset.
like that.
So our last question that we always ask is, what is the question we didn't ask that we should have asked? When you say, what is the question we should be asking about the future of HR technology overall? And then, of course, the challenge is, Mary, then we're going to ask you to answer it. Um,
Oh, wow. Okay. How about how can you link operational data, experience data, and sentiment data to create greater customer, employee, and business insights? That's what I
That's
would. That's what I'd like
that's
to
what you
see.
would. The
that
answer is integrate or die. I love
integrate
that.
or
Thanks for
die.
bringing
It
it right around.
really is. It's integrating. Have you seen? I mean, that is sort of the dream. We were talking about this. How do you react the actions that you take that affect employees and affects their attitude, affects customers, affects business outcomes. Sales, all those things. Um, have you? What do you think is the best thing we should be doing to make that happen, other than just integrating?
It's I'm going to go back to silos. It is sharing the data across functions, creating that visibility, leveraging technology like AI, and just being curious. Like, what experiences are we driving for our customers that are working or our employees, and what's not? And then how can we do it differently? There's that curiosity. But if you don't have the insights, if you're not looking at it from a cross-functional perspective, you're going to miss so much, and you're going to take action that really doesn't move the needle as much as you could be. Right. So that's what I'd like. That's what I'd like to see.
I love
I
that.
love
I
that.
love that.
I love the
And
being curious. Go ahead,
yeah,
Jordan.
so true. And I think that when we like take a moment to consider people's actual jobs in their lives, right? So we've got people in HR, we've got people in marketing, we've got people in customer experience and success. There's value to them personally in cutting across borders to connect and break down those silos, right? If you're in HR, if you're in marketing and you're coming across and saying, I'm working on X, Y, and Z, but the downstream effect is elsewhere within the organization, connecting this with the career discussion, like no one is going to be more highly lauded than someone who comes up and says, hey, I was working on this and I found this out through the data, which has never been more accessible. It used to be you'd have to extract things into SPSS and then know what you were doing to, create insights. Now there's computer programs for that, right? I figured this out, but it affected someone else. So I walked over, or we're all remote or hybrid. So I slacked over to this other person and said, hey, I found this out. This is what we can do to yield X, Y, and Z. Let's do it and start to build that coalition of collaboration that yields a change in the business. And when you come back to your boss and say, hey, I learned this in what was your example in the support function, and now we yielded 18x more, whatever,
Right.
widget orders, all of a sudden you're a hero and your career has changed because people see you as someone who gets stuff done, who takes initiative, who breaks down barriers, and who is reliable enough with curiosity and data and everything to change for the better.
Jordan, what I really love about what you just said is a lot of times employees feel like it's their leaders that have to make the change, that have to do the
Yeah.
cross-functional alignment. If, my leader is responsible for this, you as an employee have power. You have
Yeah.
a part of the organization's success is your responsibility. So have, courage and take advantage of those opportunities to leverage the data and collaborate. Yeah, because the employees can make that change for an organization too. I love that.
Yeah, and I think on leaders should encourage people to cut across silos, and a lot of
Oh,
leaders
yeah.
don't. It's like, how come you're talking to that department? You should go through
Right.
me. I think it's more of a democratization of data, a more of sharing, a more open collaboration, and what is it, Brené Brown's assume positive intent.
I like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you
Yeah.
That's
go.
a good way to
So
be.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with that, Mary, thank you so much for appearing
Thank
on
you, Mary.
Integrate or Die. This was, again, a fascinating conversation. Jordan and I, it's like we kind of go into conversations. We never quite know where they're going to go. But I just came away with some insights. And really, here's for having a chief experience officer. That's what we
Yeah.
need, a chief experience officer who cuts
Yeah.
across, who's focused on how do people feel about what you're doing to them.
Yes. Let's spread that word. That is
Yes.
exactly or TXO, a total
Yeah.
experience
Total
officer.
experience officer. That's even
There you
cooler.
go. Yeah.
Well,
We
Mary, thank you
Thanks,
so much for
Mary.
appearing on the show.
thank you guys.